Hey, gang, welcome back to Ken Michaels Radio. A big thank you to all of you who have been watching my videos that I've been doing the last few years, and they're all about the Beatles. Conversations about the Beatles, their group years, their solo years, sometimes what's going on in the news. We interview all kinds of people here. Oh, very nice there, Andy. Make sure everybody sees your t-shirt. Let me show you mine. I got a Paul shirt on. Most of the time, you never see my shirts here because of the way I have the camera set up, one of Paul's touring shirts. And yeah, so we interview musicians, we interview podcasters, DJs, friends of the Beatles, you name it, authors, especially authors here on this channel. And my special guest this time is Andy Cahan. Andy has had a career in the music business for a good 60 years. And he released a book a few years ago. It's called The Most Famous Musician You've Never Heard of. This is the front cover of his book. And Andy's holding up something that he just did. If you want to explain it, Andy.
Yeah, it's half me and half me. One half is 52 years older than the other half.
Okay. Fits nicely. Still fits nicely.
Yeah.
We have Andy on because, well, for one thing, he's a massive Beatles fan. He's going to talk a lot about that. And he's worked with so many people in the music business. That's what his book is all about. It's his autobiography. And I have to confess, this book makes me dizzy. There's so many people that he's worked with. And what impresses me the most is that I get the idea that maybe from the moment he was born, he was going to record every single thing he's ever done and write it down like in a diary, because it seems like everything is there. And not only is everything there in the book, he's got links on YouTube to films that he made when he was a kid. I mean, if you want to see it, if you want to know everything about Andy Cahan's life, you can do that from reading his book and also following him and what he's posted on YouTube. But before we talk with him, just want to read what it says here early in the book to give you an idea of some of the people he has worked with. He wrote, I have hung out with, recorded in a studio, and or performed on stage, TV, or films with Jimi Hendrix, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, Ringo Starr, the Turtles, Harry Nilsson, Jimmy Webb, Eric Carmen, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Seals and Crofts, Dr.John, John Bonham, Booker T, Steve Perry, Lowell George, Ed Cassidy, Frank Zappa, Martin Mull, Kinky Friedman. And you got to make sure you remind me to talk about the Kinky Friedman story, because
absolutely.
Kinky recorded a song with Ringo in it and you play on it. And then there's the pinnacle of your career, Ray Bolger. And we will talk about that too.
Oh boy.
So welcome to the channel, Andy. This has been a long time coming.
Oh, this is wonderful. I'm really grateful. You can tell everybody about my relationship with your wife.
Well, Andy came to know my wife, Joanne, long before I ever met her. And this was back in the 70s.
Yeah.
And she's always been a big 60s fan. And one of the many bands she loves is the Turtles. And from the Turtles came Mark Volman and Howard Kaylan, Flo and Eddie. She went to a number of their concerts. And eventually she got to know you because you played with Flo and Eddie in the band. You're actually, it was more of a, at the time, a three-piece unit, because you not only played the keyboards, but you also played a drum machine at the same time. And through working with you guys, she became the head of the fan club for less than a year of what were called the Grandmothers.
Exactly.
This is all from Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. And the Grandmothers, I'm not a big Zappa fan, so you'll have to correct me on this.
I'm not either.
But you worked with Howard and Mark, and you know them, you know, a lot of it through the Frank Zappa connection too. And the Grandmothers, I believe, were former members of the Mothers of Invention, getting together in different groups, putting out albums. And so my wife was the head of the fan club for under than a year. And she knew you because you headed the fan club before her.
Yes.
So
I actually created the Grandmothers. I went to Rhino Records and told them, listen, I know Jimmy Carl Black and Bunk Gardner and Buzz Gardner and Elliot Ingber and Don Preston and Ruth and Ian Underwood. And I knew everybody because of Jimmy. And I put together a compilation of individual songs that they wrote without Zappa and put out the Grandmothers on Rhino.
Okay.
And it sold more records than any title at that time that Rhino had. It sold 10,000 units in the first quarter, which was huge for Rhino, you know, at that time.
It's got to be what, hardcore Zappa fans probably buying that.
Yeah, and then I put out the Grandmother's Fan Club white vinyl square picture disc with the Cal Schenkel artwork and all the fan club book that you fill out. I did a whole thing, and that sold like 10,000 copies. It was pretty amazing. Out of my living room, just starting a record company.
Well, you can find out about that and so much more in your book. I mean, there's so much here to cover. But I want to go back to the very beginning, and we're going to lead into when you saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. But when you first started out in music, your first lesson was on the piano, and that actually came from your father.
Yes, my father was a golfer, a semi-pro, but he loved music, and he sat down at the piano with me and he says, let me show you something. So he takes a triad, dun, 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 just do what I do. So I did it. And then with his other hand, he went bum, 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 bum. So I did both hands one time, and it was perfect. Then he said, okay, we're going to switch. We'll take the other hand and do that. And then with this hand, do the bum, bum, bum. And I played it perfectly first time. And that was my only piano lesson. That was it.
And, you know, that's a skill right there because, you know, I remember from playing the piano, usually in the left hand, you'll play the chord or three notes of a chord, and then you play the main melody in the right hand. So, you know, on first lesson, you were able to do both and switch.
I know, that was amazing. I loved it. I was absolutely loved it.
And you learned how to play the bass and guitar and drums, and it all came natural to you.
It came because of the Beatles. Literally, they were my teachers.
So did you want to, initially when you started out your career in music, did you have a specific goal in mind? Did you want to be a leader of the band? Did you want to be the lead singer? Did you want most of the attention to be on you? Or did you just want to be one of the guys in a band, you know, a group of equals?
You know, before I saw the Beatles, I was a big Motown fan, and you know, all the like Del Shannon, Runaway. I learned his organ solo, and that was exciting to me. That was wonderful. And so I just loved the fact that I was on a stage and playing music and people were dancing. It was wonderful. It was the greatest feeling in the world at 15 years old.
Right, sure.
Yeah.
And just to know that you're getting feedback from an audience, especially at a young age, that's got to be exhilarating.
It was wonderful. It was great.
You just mentioned Motown.
Yes.
Before the Beatles, what I call BB. Give us an idea of the other artists that you appreciated back then as a kid, before you heard the Beatles.
Well, I loved, there was a song called Meet Me on South Street.
Yep.
By the Orlons. Meet me on South Street. Oh, yeah, coming on down.
Right.
Really, I love all that up stuff. And Mickey's Monkey. You know, you remember Mickey's Monkey?
Sure.
All those great tunes. And Hold On, I'm Coming. And, you know, all those Sam and Dave stuff. And, oh, I loved it all. Loved it all.
So your taste was very varied then.
Yeah. And Joey D and the Starlighters, you know, the Peppermint Twist. And what was it? Get a Job. What
the
was
Silhouettes? The Silhouettes.
And Silhouettes, and also Blue Moon. Ba 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 ba. You know, I loved all the doo-wop stuff. I loved Danny and the Juniors. You know, at the Hop and all that. Loved it. I loved that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, as time goes on, I love that music I was a little kid when that was all coming out.
Yeah.
But I'm sure I heard some of it then, and I appreciated it as time went on. I love it
Yeah.
more now than I did as a kid. You know, were you
Yeah.
kind of driven because so much of the work that you've done through all these years? I know you play a lot of instruments, but it seems a lot of it was as a keyboard player. Were you kind of driven also towards bands where the focus could be on the keyboards? Because you do say very early on in your career you became good friends with Felix Cavallari.
Yes.
So a band like that, or the Doors, where you hear a lot of, keyboard, were you very attracted to that kind of music?
Absolutely, yes. What's very interesting is Felix Cavallari played bass on the Hammond B3 with his feet. He had feet pedals.
Uh-huh.
So he would play the bass with his foot,
Right.
and the rhythm and the lead, on the organ. And the Doors, Ray Manzarek played left-hand bass with the Fender bass keyboard,
Right.
you know. And so I got a Farfisa combo compact red organ.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing that Sam the Sham used, same thing that Paul Revere used, same
Yep.
thing as come on down to my boat, baby. All those cheesy 96 Tears,
Uh-huh.
all those were all the cheesy Farfisa organ. But I played left hand bass. And I went to Manny's Music in New York City,
Sure.
and I had him hook up a Hammond Leslie speaker to my Farfisa organ going through my Ampeg bass amp.
Right.
So I had the left hand coming through the bass amp, which sounded like God, and then the right hand was through the Leslie speaker. So I was trying to emulate a Hammond B3 with a Farfisa combo compact, which sounded pretty good. It really did. I've got a song called "The Sky's Falling,"
Hmm.
which you can hear how cool it sounded, with
Mm-hmm.
those combination.
Yeah. Now, I believe the first band you ever formed was called the Jaguars. Was that the first one?
Yes,
Okay. And
yeah,
they were primarily surf music.
it was
So,
all surf. Yeah,
okay. So that was all Beach Boys and Jan and Dean, or any
it
other
was
artists?
all instrumental, like
Oh,
like
Ventures.
the Ventures.
Right.
We did every song on the Ventures' first two albums. We did all those songs,
Uh-huh.
Perfidia, and all these weird surf songs. Now, the reason it was called the Jaguars because we had no bass player. It was the three guitar players, and they all had the Fender Jaguar, which is like the Rolls Royce of the Fenders. It
Uh-huh.
was all the bells and whistles were on that guitar. So I played a Thomas organ. This is before the Farfisa, and we just did all these surf songs, and it was fun. It was great. It was a lot of fun.
All right. Well, I'm happy to see all this other music that you were into before the Beatles. But
Yeah.
obviously, that big night of February 9th, 1964 changed your life. What do you remember about that night?
Well, I was rehearsing with my band, and my sister walks in the room, and she says, "You got to watch Ed Sullivan show tonight. They got a group called the Beatles." And I think I've heard like "I Want to Hold Your Hand" or something on the radio, but I didn't own the album. So I went and I watched them, and I was in shock, and I was in awe, and I could not believe what I was looking at because they were all really good looking. They all had their suits on. They all had the Beatle haircut and
Hmm.
the Beatle boots, and they all sang, and it was all original music, And I went crazy. The next day, I hopped on my bicycle and went to the pharmacy and bought Permastraight because I had curly hair.
Uh-huh.
So I bought Permastraight so I can get straight hair like a Beatle. And it worked for about an hour. And then after that, it just frizzed up into this big afro. So, but I love the Beatles. And because of them, I started a band with some members from the Tokays. Well, it was called the Jaguars. And then we started the Tokays.
Mhm.
Then we changed to the Individuals. And then my mom sewed us Nehru jackets, all blue Nehru jackets. And we had the black Dickie or the white Dickie and our Beatle boots. And we were, you know, and I had my Farfisa. So I was like Dave Clark 5. I was like Mike Smith. And, you know, we just did originals and the covers. And we won all of the Battle of the Bands, every single one of them, for like 3 years in a row.
Okay.
We were the top band in Westchester County. And I booked the band at Yale University and all these colleges and all these things. We would make 100 or 125 a night, you know.
That was pretty good for back then.
That was really good for a 16, 17-year-old band, you know. We were young guys.
How did they look at you booking the band? You're just a kid.
I know, but we were very popular. Our lead singer, Reno, was incredible. He was a great singer. And with my left-hand bass and the organ and the guitar, we were like a little Rascals. But you know, we did Beatles stuff and Dionne Warwick and, you know, all. In fact, the same songs I play with my trio today are the same songs I played in 1965.
Oh, that's funny.
I'm stuck in a time warp. I refuse to move from the 60s. I have to stay there.
Okay, well, I love the 60s to death, you know.
Me too.
I love the other decades a lot, but you know,
yeah,
we all have our different tastes, but you know, it's so much a part of our DNA.
Oh man.
And I tell you, there's so much music that I loved for many years and love even more now. The music is more powerful than it's ever been, especially when you mention like Dionne Warwick. With the recent passing of Burt Bacharach, I've been listening to a lot of the stuff that Burt Bacharach wrote, and obviously Dionne Warwick was the voice for Burt Bacharach and Hal David for many years, and all the other artists that covered Bacharach and David. And that music is so incredibly impressive and very innovative. And yeah, so sorry I'm going off on a tangent here, but
it's really interesting. Manfred Mann and Love both did a Burt Bacharach song called My Little Red Book.
Right.
Bum, 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 bum. I just took out my little red book. That's a Burt Bacharach song.
Right.
What a cool song.
I know.
You know, it's like a rocker.
It's their music was very unusual. There's always something different about it, melodically, rhythmically, different time changes. There's all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. Oh.
But in a way that flowed really well. You know, and you could say a lot about all the great innovators like the Beatles. There's a lot of times in Beatles music where they're going through tempo changes.
Oh, absolutely.
A lot of John stuff, especially, and George with Here Comes the Sun, and everything just flows like you'd never know there was a difference.
I know. Really cool. Very cool. The Beatles were my teachers. I had the Meet the Beatles album, and I had a drum set, and I just played along with the entire album. Whatever Ringo did, I did. So Ringo was my teacher on the drums. And then all the chord progressions, you know, and the melodies that they used, you know, like flatted minor fifths and these great chords that I started writing songs like a madman because of the Beatles. You know, they were so exciting and inspirational. It was a new life.
That's great. And you know, the Beatles, when they did these things, when they would have these odd chord progressions and odd chords, they really weren't aware of the fact that they were odd or anything. It's just whatever sounded natural in their ears, that's what they went with.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's incredible what they accomplished, you know.
Yeah, what was the guy's name? The rockabilly guy, Eddie Cochran, and who's the guy with the curly Q haircut? Very
Carl Perkins.
Yeah, well, there was Carl Perkins and
rockabilly.
I forgot the original Gene Vincent.
Oh yeah.
And they loved the Everly Brothers. They loved all that Little Richard and Chuck Berry, and you know. That was the Everly Brothers harmonies.
Yes.
I think was a major influence on John and Paul's harmonies.
Well, the Everly Brothers, from what I've been told, a lot from my wife. Bring her up again, because she's big on harmonies and she studies harmonies. And the Everly Brothers did a lot of unusual stuff. It wasn't very traditional 1-3-5 harmonies,
right? Yeah,
and a lot of what the Beach Boys did was that. Not to knock the Beach Boys, they sounded fantastic with what they did.
yes.
But you know, sometimes the Beatles harmonies, they would do things that the Everly Brothers would do, like the harmonies on 8 Days a Week are somewhat different in the direction that like where Paul would go, compared to what John was singing. But you'd only know that if you really study it.
I know. Yeah, it's amazing. The harmonies of John and Paul were so cool, so cool.
And George. And
Oh
very
yeah. I mean, when they did because that's amazing. And Nowhere Man and what was the other one? If You Wear It Tonight.
yes, it is.
You know, all the harmonies were tight, amazing. George was did great harmonies. He was really good. They sounded so great with their harmonies.
Yeah, and This Boy is another one.
Oh yes, This Boy, of course.
And George usually was in the middle between the three of them. And
John,
I've been told, I mean, you study this stuff, that the person singing in the middle, that could be the most difficult part.
it is, because you have to really concentrate on your note because they're around you. That's why they share a microphone. You notice they share a mic
on This Boy.
3 of them. And when they were doing this early stuff,
Mm-hmm.
now it's, you know, state of the art and everybody's spread all over the stage, but they didn't have monitors in those days. When they did Ed Sullivan and all that, there was no monitors. They just, whatever the PA system they can hear, that's what they were singing. So that's why when they did the 3-part, they all got around one mic and balanced it out just by the distance from their vocal to the mic. So it blended.
That's probably the same thing when I watch early footage of Peter, Paul, and Mary.
Oh, yes. Yes.
I mean, not only do they harmonize well, but they know how to control how loud or how soft to sing, because they're right next to each other around the same microphone. So,
and it really is true though, when you're next to somebody, you can blend. I sing better when I'm singing with somebody on the same mic. My pitch is better. It's just better. If I'm all alone on a mic, I'm a little bit weaker. But when I'm singing with somebody on a mic, I'm right on. It's an amazing feeling because you're hearing their voice and it triggers you to be right there. You know, it's really cool.
Yeah, and not only that, obviously when the equipment on stage got to be better and you could hear through the monitors, and you're dealing with great harmony acts, not just the Beatles, but, you know, Crosby, Stills, and Nash, whoever you want to name, you know, these are people that can sing in their sleep together, because they spent so many years together.
The Hollies, the Moody Blues, you know, the great stuff like that. Really good.
Yeah. All right. So talk a little bit about, since you mentioned Ringo, how did he influence you as a drummer? What is it that makes Ringo special to you as a drummer, when there's a lot of other people that point to other drummers in rock that they admire a lot? And you got to work with John Bonham too. You know, but what is it about Ringo specifically? Because you even told me, because it's very easy for me to look at your book and think, he plays a lot of instruments, but you're mainly a keyboard player. But yet you said to me privately, you really love playing the drums the most.
I do. I love the drums. It's my favorite instrument. It is. But your question was,
what makes Ringo so special as a drummer, and how he's influenced you in your playing?
Yes. Well, his taste, the way he would play, was very tasty. It was always the feel of the melody and the chords. he just didn't play rhythm. He was following whatever the chords and the melody were doing. He would, make it just like that. And we both know that he's left-handed. So when he does a regular fill that a right-handed drummer would do, it's difficult because he's starting with his left hand.
Right.
And it's easier for him to go backwards coming around this way because he's left-handed. So it's really interesting. There are places I remember in my life, the drum, all the different cool little hi-hat things he does. And on the song Wait, he goes, all these really cool little fills he does. Ticket to Ride, check, jump, chat, just all these cool parts. The outro to Strawberry Fields, on the anthology, they have just Ringo and John sitting on the floor playing the overdub percussion part to the outro, I love that stuff. It's just fantastic. And actually the best drum part is on the basic track for Good Morning, Good Morning. It's take number 8 on the anthology.
Right.
And it's just John, Ringo, and Paul. It's the most amazing track I've ever heard in my life. I mean, Paul's bass is so synchronized with Ringo's, and John is just playing dan, 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 just straight chords. And that's my favorite Beatle track. You can just hear the scratch vocal of John singing, and there's no George Harrison. It's just John, Ringo, and Paul playing live. Right. And it's my favorite. That's my favorite.
When the anthology first came out, that was one of my favorite tracks because it's just the band. And when you're so used to hearing the version that's on Sgt. Pepper with all the animal sound effects and everything, which can kind of bury what the band is playing, here it's just them and nothing else.
I know. I love it much better than all the horns and the animals. I like the raw meat of just the three of them just rocking. Really a great song.
Let me ask you this. Once in a while, if I have a drummer on my channel, I like to ask this question. Ringo, as you know, is a lefty playing on a right-handed kit. How much of his innovation comes from that? And how much of it comes from what he hears in his head to play?
Like I said, he follows the melody and the chords. Whatever the excitement or the mellow or up, he'll follow it, and that's the way he plays. He listens to the song and he accents what the song is doing. And that's the difference between him and a lot of other drummers who are just playing the rhythm, and they're just, it's just straight ahead rhythm. But Ringo really follows the song and accentuates and makes it cool. He was the best.
He has said that his fills are really, the art of what he does. And very often you don't realize it unless somebody else is playing Ringo's part in a Beatles tribute band, how much those fills make a difference. Or sometimes when you're playing less or not playing anything at all, how much that can make a difference in the song. You don't realize how much his part is so integral to the recording itself. Because there's so many Beatles tribute bands out there, and I applaud all of them. They have their heart in the right spot, but so many of them think, oh, just play simple, as a drummer, but they're not capturing what Ringo does. And
I know I have not heard a Beatle band yet that has a Ringo drummer. The drummer's okay, and he plays sort of the same part that Ringo does on the song, but it doesn't have that pocket, that natural just feel. It's so dynamic. It's wonderful.
What's your favorite drumming from Ringo? Let's just say from the Beatle years, because I'd love to talk about the solo stuff too, but so many great parts he's played. Good.
She said, she said, she said. There's a overdub. There's 2 drum tracks One is, she said, I know what it's like to be dead. I know it is to be, and you're making me feel like you've never been born. And just the way that Jeff Emmerich recorded the cymbal crashes, it sounded so cool. And I just love the all the great drum licks. And she said, and of course, Day in the Life, boom, 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 with the mallets. Those were mallets, to give it that warm sound. But yeah. And what was it? Glass Onion, and Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except for Me and My Monkey. The drums on that track is so cool. The sound of the drums and the cowbell, just really great stuff. Unbelievable.
What do you think of, since he often cites Rain as his favorite? He says he thinks he was possessed, when he did the drumming on Rain. How do you feel about that track in particular?
That is incredible, especially the breakdown when it goes down, 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 right. And Paul does a it's just like incredible stuff. Rain. Yeah. I mean, that whole thing, that Paperback Writer and Rain and Baby You're a Rich Man. And, the only song I really am upset about is Got to Get You Into My Life, because the drums are buried. If you play the song from the album, the drums are you can hardly hear the drums at all. You just hear the vocals and the horns and the bass and the guitar, but you really don't hear how cool Ringo's drums are on that,
Okay.
That's the only song that upsets me mix-wise, that Ringo's drums are not loud enough on that song.
Okay. Boy, it's very easy for me to just concentrate on the Beatles here. Try to have a short answer here. Have you spent a lot of time listening to the remixes from the archival box sets?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you very pro remixing, or are you more a purist?
I'm a purist. Okay. If it was up to me, I would do mono analog. Because when you hear those, Please Please Me and all these early singles, they're mono analog, and it's just with the liveness and the richness of the instruments were really amazing. And then when they got into stereo, it kind of opened up the track, and it didn't have the same impact to me as the mono. I loved mono. It was right there, So that's my opinion of that,
Well, the beauty of it all is that so many different Beatle fans have different opinions, and
yes,
you grew up on stereo, and it's like mono is going backwards for some people. And I also understand, it's one strong signal right in your face.
That's it. Yeah.
To me, there's nothing like Revolution in mono.
Oh yeah, that kicks butt.
It lacks something in stereo, although when it gets remixed, we'll see what Giles Martin could do with that. But there are some songs that are lacking a lot in stereo. Revolution, even John said it. In an interview on WNEW in New York, that the stereo version sounds like a piece of ice cream.
Right.
So we all have different opinions, and there's a part of me that really wants to adapt to the new remixes and be open-minded to it, and of course, and you being a drummer, you're hearing the drumming so much clearer than before, and the bass more than you ever have before.
Yes,
I'm sure that pleases Paul and Ringo a lot. But then there are those who think, but they were happy with the way it came out when they were together in the 60s. They approved it that way. So how do you know what to think? Listen to all of it.
Yeah. Like, Paul's new album, it's all digital, it's all compressed, and it doesn't sound like a live band. It sounds like a studio overdubbed, very compressed, tight sound. It doesn't have that openness that the Cherries album, with Maybe I'm Amazed and Junk and all those. They had, it was live. He had one mic or something, plugged directly in the back of the machine. No board. It was really just a live sound. I love that live sound.
Well, like, remember the first McCartney album, most of the tracks were done on his home studio.
Yes,
but there were some songs towards the end that he recorded in the studio with a lot of tracks to work with on the mixing board. It wasn't all, thinking like, just of the studio. Maybe I'm Amazed was that way.
Right. And Monkberry Moon Delight. There was a website at one time that had 4 tracks: bass, drums, keys, and vocal for Monkberry Moon Delight. So you can online just solo the bass or solo the drums, or it was so cool.
Oh,
so
I know.
Cool.
I think that was Paul's website. I think he did that.
Yeah, I think so. You're right.
He did that, I think, for Maybe I'm Amazed too.
Yes. Yeah.
But like Man We Was Lonely was one of the last songs on the first McCartney album, and that was done in the studio. And I'm pretty sure Crina Crore was done in the studio.
Yep.
So it wasn't all done at home.
Yeah. But it's just a great album. Yeah, it was amazing. When I heard Maybe I'm Amazed, I went absolutely berserk. It was incredible. And Junk, the chords, da 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 da. Amazing chords, amazing melody, really.
Yeah, I've often said John, Paul, and George, to me, my opinion, are 3 of the greatest melodic songwriters of all time.
Of all times.
Yeah, and that's one thing that they carried into their solo careers, and even Ringo became a good songwriter. So if you're a melody person, as I am, the melody is always the most important thing in a song. As much as I love the lyrics, I don't know how you can't love the Beatles.
I know. There are people out there that don't like the Beatles, but everybody to their own, right?
That's true. Let's go back to your career early on. A friend of your parents, Irwin Garr, gave you your first really big break in the music business. Talk about him and what he did for you.
Well, I moved out to California after stealing my lead singer's girlfriend in revenge for him stealing my movie camera. So we got to LA, and my mom's friend, Irwin Garr, had a record company called Pulsar Records. And he used to be with ABC Dunhill with the Mamas and Papas. So he started his own label, and Dr.John the Night Tripper and Graham Bond and Wayne Phillips. I forgot. He was a singer-songwriter, and another black singer. I forgot his name. Anyways, so I was the gopher for $35 a week. I'd take pictures at recording sessions, pick up the musicians in my VW bus, take them to the session, go get the coffee, go do the Xerox, do all the stuff. But I was still playing music, and I wanted to play. So Graham Bond called me up, and he said, we're going to do a jam session in a recording studio. Bring your harpsichord. I had that Baldwin electric harpsichord, and I still have my Leslie speaker. So I ran the harpsichord through the Leslie. It was amazing. So here I am setting up the harpsichord. Mitch Mitchell was on the drums. And then Jack Cassidy from the Airplane was on bass. And Lowell George was on the flute.
Yep.
And then Graham Bond was on the Hammond B3. And I felt something, and I looked around, and in comes Jimi Hendrix with 2 blonde chicks, one holding his amp and one holding his guitar. And he walks in, and he sits right next to me. And he plugs in, and we start playing the blues in A, and I'm droning on the harpsichord with the Leslie, and he's digging it. And, it was a 2-hour jam, and I had goosebumps for the entire session. It was like, it was amazing. It was totally amazing.
What do you remember saying to Jimmy during the session?
Well, he was very, very shy.
Mm.
We didn't talk a lot until after the session when everybody's packing up. He was standing in the corner of the studio and he lights up a joint and he goes, come here. So I go over there and a roadie guy stands. So the three of us are standing in the corner of the studio smoking a joint. So Jimmy starts going, and he hands the joint to me and I start playing the drums, and then I hand the joint to the other guy and he starts playing bass. So we're doing a power trio in the corner of the room with our mouths, smoking a joint. I mean, that to me was like the most amazing thing that ever happened. Just standing there with Jimmy. He was really a sweet guy, really shy, bashful, happy, very humble, very humble, nice guy.
So this jam was all organized by Graham Bond?
No, Jimi Hendrix organized it. Noel Redding was in the booth with the engineer. So Noel and Mitch and Jimmy were all there. But he had Jack Cassidy and Lowell George and Graham Bond. So yeah, Graham Bond had the Graham Bond organization with Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce before the Cream.
Right.
So that was a blues band, and Graham actually brought the Mellotron to the United States, and the Mellotron was tape loops.
Sure.
Every note was a tape recorder.
Mm-hmm.
So they had the flute. So when you play a C flute, it was a loop that went past the playhead. And if you bumped it by mistake, if you bumped the Mellotron, it would go, it would break. It wouldn't work. So you had to be really, really gentle with it. But that's what they used on Strawberry Fields, the opening flute thing. And You Know My Name, you know my name,
mm-hmm.
That's the Mellotron with that little boom, the drum beats and all that. That's all the Mellotron. Really cool stuff.
So this jam session I have down as November of 1968. So did Graham, you say that he brought the Mellotron to music? This is before the Beatles used it?
Yes. Well, I guess no, it's after, because Strawberry Fields was 1960, what? Six?
Yeah.
So this is 1968. So it was a couple of years after the Beatles used it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think the Moody Blues also used it on, Tuesday Afternoon and the
Days of Future Past.
Yep.
Yeah. So cool. There's no chance at all that jam was recorded.
It was recorded, and I posted on social media, and one guy sent me a couple of discs. It was Jimmy, but it wasn't the same lineup. It wasn't Lowell George and Jack Cassidy and Graham Bond. It was another jam session he did at the same studio, TTG Studios.
Okay.
So I never got to hear or see the finished jam session on tape. I just got stoned with Jimmy and played the blues in A for 2 hours.
But the purpose of doing this jam session was maybe to prepare Jimmy for another show, maybe with this lineup.
He loved to jam with musicians. He would just book some time in the studio and invite people down and party and just jam and have fun. And I don't even know if some of those songs actually made it to records.
Okay,
it could be, but he didn't sing much. It was all instrumental, so it was pretty interesting.
I'm wondering who covered the expenses.
He did.
Really? It wasn't the record company doing that?
It could have been. I never knew. I didn't know nothing. I was 20 years old with a harpsichord. I didn't know nothing.
Yeah. All right, let me just take note of some other important collaborations and performances that you have listed here in your book. You played drums live for Buddy Miles.
Yes, that was like 2 weeks after the Jimi Hendrix recording session. Graham Bond calls me up and says, Buddy Miles is playing at the Del Mar racetrack in San Diego, and he usually has two drummers, but his drummer got sick.
Mm.
So he said, Andy, do you know any drummers? I says, I can play drums. So it's okay, go on down there. And I just copied what Buddy Miles did, down, 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 down,
Right.
down, 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 down. I just looked at him, and whatever he was doing, I do, and do the same fills. And so it was, that was 2 weeks after playing with Jimi Hendrix. I was on the stage with Buddy Miles playing drums.
You must have been on some high during this.
Oh my God. I mean, it was amazing. I was in such ecstasy. I didn't realize what was going on until I'm 70 years old looking back at it,
Right.
So come on people, now smile on your brother, the Youngbloods.
Right.
And I guess the lead singer's name was Banana or something like that.
I thought it was Jesse Colin Young.
Yeah. But there was a guy named Banana in the
Right.
Youngbloods.
Yeah. Okay.
So I remember talking with him backstage and, hanging out with the Youngbloods. I've met so many musicians, the Sopwith Camel, hello. I mean, there's so many great, Tommy Rowe and, all these wonderful childhood music I grew up listening to. I get to hang out with them. And that to me was wonderful. Just hanging out with these guys.
It's great that you have it all captured in your book here. Let me list a few more things.
Sure.
Played electric harpsichord for Dr. John at the Scene in New York City with John Bonham on drums and Booker T on Hammond B3. I mean, it must have been not only with Dr. John. I mean, you love playing the drums. You got John Bonham there. So this is before. Oh no, this is Led Zeppelin had already formed at this point.
Yeah, right? This is 1968, and
this is July of '69. You have.
Oh, I do. Okay, yeah. So that's when it was. Okay, so Dr. John was booked to do the Toronto Pop Festival.
Right.
So we played the Whiskey in L.A., and then we drove to New York in 2 VW buses, and we visited my mom. We went to my mom's house and she made us food and stuff. And then we went to the hotel in New York and we played a couple of nights at Steve Paul's The Scene, which was a huge, Jimi Hendrix played there and a lot of famous guys played there. So, Eric Clapton and Ginger Baker and John Bonham and Booker T were all backstage hanging out. So, Mac says, hey, why don't you want to come up and play with us? So Eric and Ginger were busy doing drugs in the corner of the room. But Booker T and John Bonham came out and Mac played the guitar. He's a really good guitar player too, besides piano player. And I was on the harpsichord and we did, Mama Roo and Snake a la Gris Gris and all the original Dr. John songs.
Yeah.
And fucking John Bonham, he's got to be the best drummer I've ever seen rock and roll. To me, he is. I mean, I love Ringo and the Beatles, but the Led Zeppelin stuff, forget about it. Good Times, Bad Times, and all these great, amazing drum parts. Yeah, they're two apples and oranges between Ringo and John Bonham. They're two different, just like Ginger Baker and Mitch Mitchell and Keith Moon. All, everybody's got their own style.
That's right. They're all great in their own way.
Yep.
But at least where you're concerned, Ringo influenced you the most.
Oh, he was my teacher.
Okay.
Yeah.
You wrote a song with Dr. John, Opium Rose.
Opium Rose, about a girl that he fell madly in love with. and he wrote this song about her. And we hung out at Sound City Recording Studios in Panorama City in LA, in the Valley. And I was recording with Geronimo Black, with Keith Olsen. Keith Olsen's the guy who did Fleetwood Mac, the engineer producer. So anyway, so Dr. John was in the other studio. So I went to go visit him, and I played him this little piano part, and he loved it.
Mm-hmm.
He says, let's write a song. And so I went to A&M Studios where he was working, and we sat in a little back room, and this guy named Fred Lippis was playing chopsticks. Instead of drumsticks, there were chopsticks on little bells and little wooden blocks, and it was a very interesting drum part he played. And the song, the bridge of the song was in 11/8.
Wow.
So it went bam bam da 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 bam bam da 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 bam bam. So it was in a weird time signature, and that's up on YouTube. I have that demo of me and Mac doing that, and he was gonna give it to the. Oh no, I can't. My brain's not working.
It's all right. It's a lot to remember.
Yeah. I can't remember. It's a black group, and the lead singer has the big mole on his head. What's his name? You would know who I'm talking about if you've heard it.
You mentioned a few songs by them. I'll come up with it.
I can't remember. Oh well. Anyway, so I wrote a song with Mac, and it was called Opium Rose, and it's up on YouTube.
It's really impressive. You wrote with Dr. John. You've written with Lowell George. Also.
I didn't write with Lowell George. I rehearsed with him and Richie Hayward, the drummer.
Yeah.
Richie Hayward was in Little Feat, and he was also in the Fraternity of Man. Don't Bogart that joint, my friend.
Yes. Uh-huh.
So Richie and Lowell and I would rehearse on Sunset Boulevard in this woman's clothing store in the back room. But I had my harpsichord, and we were, playing Lowell's music. It was his original stuff, but it was fun. It was really cool. Lowell's a great guy.
You've done a lot of songwriting, and we'll talk about Flo and Eddie and Harry Nilsson a little bit later on. But have any of the songs that you've written ever gotten any acclaim, or have you had any hit records that you've written or co-written?
I wish. There was a song I wrote with Jimmy Seals.
Oh.
And I played this piano part for him. We went to play golf, and we went back to his house, and I said, Jimmy, here, listen to this. What do you think? And I played this piano part. He went, oh my God, I love it. So in 5 minutes, he wrote the lyrics, and it was called I'd Be a Fool If I Sent You Away. And then Patty Dahlstrom was recording an album on 20th Century Fox, and she heard it, and she wanted to record it. So I went in the studio with Bill Schnee. You know who Bill Schnee is?
The engineer.
Big engineer, producer with Ringo and everybody. And David Hungate from Toto, and David Kemper from Bob Dylan. David Kemper was on the drums, and Hungate was on the bass. It was just piano, bass, and drums track. And then not Alan McMillan, another guy from the my brain isn't working. So anyhow, this really famous guy did the string parts, and he did them from my piano part.
It's all in here.
It's all in there. I got to reference my book. For some reason, my memory cells don't work sometimes.
That's okay. But it's funny that you mentioned Jimmy Seals, because that's who I was going to bring up next. The fact that you were in a band called the Mushrooms.
Yes.
Later became Seals and Crofts.
It's a wonderful story. You're going to love this. My friend Scooby, who I met through Dr. John. Dr. John turned me on to this union representative, Scooby, and he would get me all these jobs. And he turned me on to Seals and Crofts when they were the Mushrooms. and they needed an organ player. So Jimmy Seals played the saxophone, and Dash Crofts played the drums. And I played the organ, and a guy named Edward Bogan played bass, and Johnny Trumpador played the guitar. And we did the top 40 at this place near the airport on Century Boulevard. And so when we took a break, Jimmy and Dash would get up on the stage with the mandolin and the acoustic and do the Seals and Crofts material. So anyhow, we're sitting at the table during a break, and Jimmy says to me, you know, Andy, we're trying to think of a name for the duo because, you know, they belong to the Baha'i religion, right? Yes. And the leader of the Baha'i religion's name was Baha'u'llah. That was his name. So Jimmy's looking at me and he goes, how about Baha'u'llah for the name for our duo, you know? And I go like this, and I go, Abbott and Costello, Laurel and Hardy, you know, Tom and Jerry. How about Seals and Crofts? And they both look at me and they go, yeah, okay. So I was the guy who thought of the name Seals and Crofts.
And it flows. It sure flows really well. You know?
I know. And, you know, Jimmy would come over to my house, and I had jasmine in my yard. He loved the smell of jasmine, and he'd always want a cantaloupe. That was his favorite meal. Andy, make sure you got a cantaloupe. So I'd cut open a cantaloupe, and we'd sit down and at my harpsichord, and we wrote a couple of songs. And he was writing Summer Breeze in my living room. He was trying to figure out, you know, the stuff. And that's where he came up with the line, blowing through the jasmine of my mind, because he loved jasmine. So really cool. And there's a very interesting story about Summer Breeze. The bass player, Bob Leitzik, he wrote the line, bum, 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 bum. He wrote that on the bass. Yeah. Because Jimmy was trying to think of an intro for the song, you know? So Bobby showed him this bass part, and Jimmy said, okay, yeah, we're going to use it. And they used it, but they never gave him credit or paid him a dime for that line. And that's the major hook of the song. Right. Down, 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 you know, that's the major hook. So that's an inside story about Bobby Leitzik.
Well, you know, you hear stories like that all the time.
Oh, yeah. And, the music business is vicious. Vicious.
Well, in the Beatle world, you know, we've talked about the fact that, and Paul McCartney has said that George Harrison came up with the 4 notes for "And I Love Her." Da, 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 da,
that's right.
Which is so much a part of that song.
It is yet, the song.
He doesn't get a songwriting credit because everything had to be Lennon-McCartney.
And of course, Ringo thought of the title "Hard Day's Night," and Ringo thought of the other one,
"Tomorrow Never Knows."
Did he think of that one too?
Yeah, I think so.
And then there was another one he thought of too. Hard Day's Night, and I can't remember. Anyhow, Ringo always came up with these cool lines, but he didn't get credit, or he didn't get paid extra for that. You know, they were a team, they were buddies.
And when you think about how much George Martin contributed to Beatles recordings, and he didn't get a songwriting credit for certain things that had to do with the arrangement. I'm not just talking about scoring and orchestration. I'm talking about, you know, changing, putting the chorus of "She Loves You" at the top of the song. Right. You know, and "Can't Buy Me Love" did the same thing there. It made a world of difference. You know, so happens all the time.
But you got to give Jeff Emmerich credit, because he got that sound, you know. He got that, you know, in the Sgt. Pepper and the White Album and you know, Revolver and Rubber Soul, that all those great sounds. It was
he got more involved once he started working on Revolver. But, you know, give credit to some of the other engineers too, because Norman Smith, I think, did a great job on early Beatles stuff. It really had a live sound to it. Yeah, some of that had to deal with the fact that they were in Studio 2 and there was a lot of room around them and more ambiance and stuff like that. But yeah, but Jeff Emmerich certainly was extremely innovative with what he had to do. at that time.
Did you ever read his book?
Yeah, and I interviewed him too.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that must have been amazing.
Yeah.
That
Well,
must have been wonderful.
I think if not the whole thing, part of it's on my website. But
Oh, I've got to check that out.
maybe I'll send you a file.
Oh, I love Jeff Emmerich. He's my idol. What a great guy.
Yeah. Before we get to more with the Beatles, you did a tour with Little Richard. This was part of Ralph Nader's rock and roll revival.
Correct.
And you also were named the music director on Dick Clark's American Bandstand 20th anniversary special with Little Richard. And in addition to that, you played the Grammy Awards. You were the music director for Little Richard with Chuck Berry, which I believe you said is like probably the biggest honor of your career.
Yeah, that's tie score with Harry Nilsson and Ringo Starr. But just to be, I have been working with Little Richard for a year and a half, and we were going to do the Grammys. And the whole object was that Little Richard and Chuck Berry were going to sing their hit records, but they would change the lyrics to the nominee's name. So instead of Tutti Frutti, oh, Rudy, it would be Al Green, he's clean. So they would change the name. And that was our rehearsal. So in the back room with the upright piano, Chuck Berry with his guitar, Little Richard, and me. And I'm going, oh my God. And I'm playing all their hits.
Yeah.
And rehearsing them and finding out what key, what key, so I can tell the band, this is in G, this is in, so we're doing Johnny Be Good. And Chuck is doing this. I say, what key? He says, I don't know. It's this thing right here where my hand is. And B flat. Okay. So he didn't know where he was on the guitar, but that was the key that he played Johnny Be Good.
Okay.
It was I idolized the Beatles, and the Beatles idolized Chuck and Richard. So it was like a full circle. Here I am with Chuck and Richard playing their hits, and it was incredible. But there was a lot of bummers, like the microphone went out for Little Richard while he's singing.
Yeah.
And then later on, the microphone went out for Chuck while he was singing. So all you hear is the music and you don't hear their voice. And it was, the band was scattered all over the stage. Luckily, my grand pianos slid out to the front of the stage on camera one. I'd always peek out behind, so you'd see my face on camera one. But the drummer was behind me, elevated way up in the back. The guitar player's over there. There's bass players over there. Everybody's scattered all over the stage. So there was no eye contact for outro and intro. So it was a little sloppy. And then when the mics went out, that really did it, but it came off. It was live. And I got a video from Pierre Cossette, the production company. And I've got a couple of freeze frames of Chuck and Richard and me, with my little happy face staring out. So that was like amazing to do the Grammys and to sit next to Gladys Knight and talk to Paul Simon and shake Stevie Wonder's hand and all the celebrities that were, Andy Williams, he introduced us. And I said, God, I love you. You're the best, just to meet these people and talk with them. Really exciting, really exciting.
Wow. Is this on YouTube?
Yes, it is. I do have, that's on YouTube as well. There's a Japanese YouTube where they put the, subtitles in. Okay. And then there's another one that I put up on YouTube.
I'll have to look for that.
Yeah, I can send you all those links.
Okay. Well,
or I can send you the file.
Why don't you send me the link? Because in the description box for this video, I'm going to have a whole bunch of links for people to follow, and especially some of the songs that you've done, the songs that you've written.
Sure.
Okay. Talk about, well, the probably the big turning point in your life came from meeting Howard Kaylan and Mark Volman. And
Absolutely.
that really led to so many contacts for you and opening up a lot of doors. But it actually started on the set of at a rehearsal for Frank Zappa's 200 Motels.
Yes.
And since Ringo was in the movie, although it's a short appearance, did you get to meet Ringo then?
No, I didn't. But I was in the band Geronimo Black with Jimmy Carl Black
Right.
and Bunk Gardner and Ray Collins and Roy Estrada. Anyway, so Zappa called up Jimmy and he says, I'm doing a movie called 200 Motels and I want you to be in it.
Hmm.
So I went with Jimmy to the rehearsal and there was Flo and Eddie and they were rehearsing my name is Bertram. I am a redneck.
Okay.
Cowboy Bert, whatever the song is. So
Uh-huh.
Flo and Eddie were background vocals for Jimmy Carl Black, you know. And then later on at Cherokee Studios, that's how I joined the Turtles. They were doing a soundtrack to a adult X-rated cartoon called Dirty Duck. That Murakami Swenson Wolf did, you know, the Jolly Green Giant and all this. Anyway, so we were in the same studio. I was doing some organ overdubs for the movie Let the Good Times Roll.
Okay.
They could hear some of the organs, so I overdubbed. And in the studio, Mark Volman asked the engineer, Bruce Robb. There's a group called the Robs that were the backup band for Where the Action Is.
Okay.
So Bruce was the engineer in the studio and he also played keyboard. So Mark Volman said, you want to come on the road with us? And he says, no, I can't. I have to be an engineer in the studio. And so Mark came up to me and he says, would you do it? Would you like to go out on the road with us? I said, hell yeah. And that was 1973.
Hmm.
And I played with them for 40 years. The last gig I played was 2013 at the Doobie Brothers Winery in Glen Ellen.
Uh-huh.
And we played that like 8 years in a row. And they always asked us back. We were always asked back every year to play. They loved the Turtles. The Doobies and the Turtles were very close friends.
Hmm. Do you want to, just for those probably younger viewers who don't make the distinction or know the difference between the Turtles and Flo and Eddie, and you know, how did Flo and Eddie start? And you're talking about 40 years on the road. Were they Turtle shows? Were they Flo and Eddie shows? Was it a mixture of both? And there's also the Happy Together tours, and you were part of that too, right?
Yeah, at the beginning, sure.
Okay. You want to
So
explain all that?
very simply, actually, Mark Volman and Howard Kalin have a video that Rhino Records put out about the whole history of the Turtles. And they're at a blackboard talking about all their different managers and how the managers ripped them off. But to make a long story short, White Whale Records, when the contract ended with the management, they were not allowed to use the name the Turtles because it was owned by White Whale. They owned the name. The management owned the name the Turtles. So Mark and Howard had to use an alternative name. And when they played with Zappa, the original roadies for Zappa was Fluorescent Leech and Eddie. Those were the names of the roadies for Frank Zappa. So Flo and Eddie, Mark and Howard said, well, we can't use the Turtles. We'll use Fluorescent Leech and Eddie as our name. And that's their first Warner Brothers album that they came out with. So for many years until 1980, they used Fluorescent Leech and Eddie and then Flo and Eddie. And it's really funny. Flo was supposed to be Howard and Eddie was supposed to be Mark. But the way they had the photos on the album cover, it was Flo and Eddie, Mark and Howard. So that's really funny. So finally in 1980, they borrowed $80,000 from somebody and they bought all of the White Whale masters. And Happy Together was one of those masters. So the Turtles are the only group in history I know from the 60s that own their own masters. Everybody else, the record company and management, own the masters. So they would get, $250,000 royalty checks from television commercials and Shrek and major motion pictures had used Happy Together, so they would get amazing royalty checks for that,
Like once they own the masters, they own the name.
They owned the name and the masters. So anytime anybody ever used one of their songs, they would get a very handsome check. Oh, I got to tell you this one story. It's really wonderful. You showed me what to do, right? And it's got really nice harmonies. All these really nice harmonies. So De La Soul sampled the record. They sampled the vocals,
right?
And they put it into one of their triple platinum albums. And Flo and Eddie's attorney was in his car listening to De La Soul, and he sampled without permission. You showed me, and that set a precedent for the law of sampling. The Turtles sued De La Soul and they won because De La Soul had to pay the full royalty rate for You Showed Me to the Turtles for a triple platinum record.
So how do they determine that it's the full royalty rate when it's only just a portion of the song?
Well, that's what the law, that's how they made the law. You're stealing somebody else's music, the actual recording. See, if you re-record it with your own musicians in your own studio, you're only responsible for the publisher. But when you're a master license, when you actually use the recording, that's you got to pay the full royalty rate. And that's what they established. So anytime after that, anybody samples stuff, they have to pay the full royalty rate. You remember that song, down, 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 down.
Oh, yeah. Under Pressure.
That was used in two different hit records. The same
Vanilla Ice. That's the whole Vanilla Ice story.
Yep.
Sure.
Pretty interesting.
But that was just so blatantly obvious.
Oh, yeah. Oh, totally.
Yeah. Well, I'm promising everyone we'll talk about the Beatles in just a few minutes, but I must say that with the Turtles, I mean, I got to give them a lot of credit for being so enterprising and finding ways of making money. I mean, one of the things that they did was the animated series. They were involved with Strawberry Shortcake, and they wrote the music for that. And you were involved with the music too. Was it just as a musician, or did you write any of the material?
No, they wrote all the songs, and I played a Casio, a little plastic little Casio keyboard. And I did all the Strawberry Shortcake albums with them. I did all the G.I. Joe albums, and we also did the Care Bears.
Right.
All those albums. And then, of course, the most exciting cartoon album that I did was called Peter and the Magic Egg.
Yes, we have to talk about that. Since I mentioned Ray Bolger at the start of the show, tell the folks how, what he had to say, especially about Judy Garland, which is, a little bit shocking for those that, if you read the book. But
yes, actually, Mark Volman has a new book out called Happy Forever. And I'm in the book, and there's actually the Ray Bolger story is in that book as well as my book. Anyway, here's the Ray Bolger. Because the Strawberry Shortcake and G.I. Joe and the Care Bears, Flo and Eddie were turned on to a project for the Easter Bunny called Peter and the Magic Egg, and they hired Ray Bolger to be Peter, the bunny.
Yep.
So we went over to Ray Bolger's house in Beverly Hills, and a mansion, and we go up to the front door, and there he is, come on in, we'll go back to the garage. So we walk through the house, back to the garage. He's got an upright piano. And we had our little portable cassette, to record the rehearsal, and which is on YouTube, by the way. It's another YouTube upload. Anyway, so I'm sitting next to Ray Bolger. I mean, the straw man from The Wizard of Oz. And the first words out of his mouth as he's looking at me, he's huge, this big guy. He was like 89 years old. I forgot how old he was. 79. He was 79, sorry. And he looks at me and he goes, do you want to know what it was like to be in The Wizard of Oz? And I had goosebumps. I was like amazed. And then after our recording, of the song, the rehearsal, he says, you want to, I said, tell me a little bit about what it was like, to shoot The Wizard of Oz. And he says it was all live. There was the Gower Street Studios, and the actors, the film crew, the orchestra was in the corner of the room, live orchestra. Everything was live. There was no overdubs. So that whole movie, when you hear her sing and hear them sing, it's all live. It's no overdubbing. And so that was amazing.
Sure.
And then he said that the Munchkins hated Dorothy. And he said the reason was that Dorothy was like, snobby, she was a star, And in fact, a lot of people on the crew made fun of the Munchkins because they were midgets, right? And in those days, it was, people made fun of them instead of respecting them. Right. Anyway, so the Munchkins really didn't like Dorothy. So they got some dog poop and they put it in a paper bag. And they went up to Dorothy's trailer, her dressing room trailer, and put the paper bag on the floor right in front of her door. Then they lit it on fire, right? And they knocked at the door and ran away. So Dorothy opens up the door and sees a burning paper bag, and she steps on it, right? So that was the monkeys, the Munchkins' revenge. So this is out of Ray Bolger's mouth. This is the true story. Wow! So that was totally amazing to hang out with Ray Bolger.
Surprised he shared that with you. Because a lot of people would like to think, especially at that young an age, that Judy Garland was, really nice and probably easy to get along with. You would hope at that early stage in her life.
I know. Well, that's out of Ray's mouth, so that's what happened.
Oh yeah. One more thing I just want to mention about Mark and Howard: they were involved with the first ever video games, Thayer's Quest, back in 1981.
That is very true. Yeah, we did all the sound effects and all the cues. It was just me. I'm doing all the cues and all the sound, the timpani drums and all the sound effects and stuff. That was all me. And it was the very first video game called Thayer's Quest. So that was amazing.
It just goes to show you, how Mark and Howard there's so many different ways that they made money through the years.
Well,
and
the most clever thing they did was at a West Coast band and an East Coast band, because it's very expensive to fly everybody in the equipment. Well, they had backline, but to fly everybody from New York to California was expensive, and it really ate up the budget. So Mark Volman said, why don't we have two bands? All the West Coast stuff is one band, and all the East Coast stuff is another band. And they did it, and they saved money. And Gary Puckett and all the other bands were, hey, that's a great idea. I think we're going to do that too, So Mark was the businessman. Mark was the Turtles. He ran the Turtles. And Howard was the lead vocals. Right. And as far as I'm concerned, Howard Kalin is right up there with Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Paul McCartney, John Lennon. He's right up there as far as singing his ass off. He never sang out of tune. He can color his voice to sound like Mick Jagger or anybody. You know, we would do parodies, and we did Jumping Jack Flash, and he sounded like Mick. It was incredible, you know. So Howard is, to me, is one of the best singers ever. Yeah. Great singer. And if you know, Flo and Eddie were on everybody's hit record. They recorded tons of stuff with T-Rex, and they did Bang a Gong, Get It On. That was them, Bang a Gong. And with Bruce Springsteen, you know, everybody's got a hungry heart. And Blondie and Duran Duran and Todd Rundgren, and the list goes on forever with all the groups that hired Flo and Eddie to sing backgrounds.
And there have been plenty of times when I've been to a Turtle show or a Happy Together show, and they kid around a lot in the introduction that they were on everyone's record.
Yes.
You know, when you heard the Eagles, that was really Flo and Eddie, or the Turtles, you know. They exaggerate, like, you know. And most people, I'm a charts person, so I know what songs went to #1 and what songs went top 10. And then they would say, well, they had 91 #1 records. And some people would actually eat that up and believe it. And of course, you know,
that was part of the routine. It was they like to make up stories and lie. So when they introduce the members of the band, they say Andy Cahan, he was the guy who played this part on this record. And I play Daydream Believer, and everybody would cheer and applause, thinking that I was the guy, but I wasn't the guy. And the same thing with our guitar player. They played with Stevie Ray Vaughan, not. And the drummer played with
well, they just, you know, they made up stuff.
Work. Yeah. Anyhow, but that was their routine. It was comedy. It was vaudeville. It was funny stuff. And that's what separated them from everybody else, because they did great rock and roll. They did original material, and they had hit records, you know, and yet they would do funny skits, you know. And Frank Zappa loved that. And they loved Frank Zappa. In fact, they knew him back in Cucamonga when Frank was doing doo-wop stuff before he actually made it. So it's really amazing. Mark Volman's book is excellent. You got to get a copy of Happy Forever.
Yeah. I went to the last Happy Together show and loved it. And you know, Gary Puckett was there, the Cowsills, who are still amazing.
Oh yes.
Little Anthony. Oh, you know, who still can belt it out, and he's got to be what, 80?
Yeah, they're you
know, these are people that keep at it, and when you do that, chances are you're going to hold on to your voice. Yeah, especially the men have to keep working at it more than the women.
Yes, absolutely.
But it's the Vogues. Oh, none of them are original Vogues. But I have a great admiration for all these shows, and Bowser is someone who I admire greatly because he does the same kind of thing. These oldie shows with a lot of different acts that come on for 3-4 songs, and that's it. But it's the only way you're ever going to see some of these people, in some cases. So yeah. But did Mark and Howard envision, because Happy Together started in '84, was it?
Yes. In my book, I have the original tour photograph. They didn't have a band yet. They didn't have any guys that they hired to play the Happy Together tour. So they asked me and a guy named Billy Steele and Lonnie Cooper to be the background musicians for their photograph. So the first Happy Together tour photograph was a band that didn't exist. Really, really funny stuff.
Well, I'm grateful that these shows continue. And one more thing about Flo and Eddie, we got to talk about Keep It Warm. Keep It Warm is probably, growing up on Long Island, we had a radio station, WLIR, and they played that song. And that's probably the most well-known, I would think, of Flo and Eddie songs. And Beatle fans should know about it because there's a reference to them in the song.
Oh yeah. And everybody loves John and Yoko.
No, it's
all you need is love.
It's and George is suing Paul, suing Ringo. and
Immigration wants John and
John and
Yoko.
Yoko, all you need is love to keep
Right,
them warm, something like that.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah, we each verse we designed musically to fit the lyrics. You
right.
know, there was a sitar on one verse, and you know the different. You know, and we went to the Beatles. All you need is love. You know, for that one little bit. But that's me on the piano.
Uh-huh.
And actually, when the Flo and Eddie did a radio show at the Alice Cooper Clarence Clemens Oktoberfest in Universal City Studios, I picked up Richard Lewis as one of the guests. My job was to drive the limo and pick up all these celebrities and bring them to a tent. They had 30 tents at the Universal Theater of every radio station across the country with their little satellite trucks. So I picked up Richard Lewis, and the first words out of his mouth was that Keep It Warm and the Moving Targets album was equivalent to Sgt. Pepper. So that was Flo and Eddie's Sgt. Pepper was the Moving Targets album. And I love that album. There's a song on that album called Best Possible Me, and it's all piano. It's a piano part. And Alan McMillan, who did the strings and the horns, he literally copied my piano part throughout the song to escalate the line. So that was like a compliment to me, you know, to have that. Because it's just like G and F. It's just two chords.
Right.
But the way I played it and the way, you know, Mark and Howard said, move it around a little bit, Andy, make it, you know, make it interesting. So that's how that came about. It was a great album. Fantastic album.
Yeah. I know you said that's the most satisfying of all their albums.
And of course, Illegal, Immoral, and Fattening was live at the Roxy, you know. We recorded it live at the Roxy, and that was great. You know, Grace Slick and Alice Cooper and Commander Cody and all these people showed up, and we got some great pictures with my daughter. She was 2 years old, so there's Bernie Taupin holding my daughter with the Grace Slick and Alice Cooper and everybody. Very cool stuff.
Well, let's kind of concentrate on Beatles stories here. And since you just mentioned Grace Slick, I was reminded of the fact that Flo and Eddie opened for the Jefferson Starship, and this was during their Red Octopus tour, which was 1975. And you got to tell the story of how Flo and Eddie and you made fun of George Harrison and his 1974 tour.
One of these hilarious skits that they did was to make fun of people, right? So George Harrison was doing the Dark Horse tour, and he lost his voice on the tour. So Mark Volman and Howard Kalin, they're talking about different celebrities, and they bring up George Harrison. So Mark starts playing "Oh My Lord," and then he goes "Oh my and he loses his voice. Meanwhile, I'm at the Hammond B3 organ, and Marty Ballin would always stand on stage next to me, you know, right next to me. And I had an afro, a big afro wig, and these big Hollywood sunglasses with the dollar signs, you know, big Hollywood. So for the skit, I was to be Billy Preston. So while they're talking to the audience about George's voice going, right, with Mark screwing up, Marty Ballin would help me with my wig. I had long hair. So I bundled it up to the top of my head, and Marty Ballin would help me put on the wig and then put on the sunglasses. And so Howard would go, "Take it, Billy," like I was Billy Preston. And I played the opening to Nothing from Nothing. I just did like 2 seconds of it. Then I went like this, the peace sign. This was at huge stadiums with 50,000 people. So I do like this. I get up in the front of the stage with Howard, and I go like that, and everybody would cheer. So that to me was like, oh my God, I got 50,000 people to cheer by going like this, you know? So that was really funny stuff happened. We did great parodies, really funny stuff.
Mhm.
Blondie, you know, or Stevie Nicks, or, you know, Mick Jagger. It was great. A lot of parodies.
That's part of the Flo and Eddie act. You know,
Well,
there's a lot of shtick in there.
the epitome of it, or the apex, is the 2.5 man show. It was just, they didn't have enough money to pay a band to go to Europe. They didn't have any, there's no budget to pay a band to go. So they wanted to hire me and call me a half a man. So it was the 2.5 man show. And I played the bass with my left hand and the piano with my right hand. And they had a Rhythm King drum machine, one of the very first drum machines. It was a blue box and it had these buttons on it. You know, you have Paso Doble, and you hit the, it goes boom, and chick, boom, 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 and chick, boom, boom. And so for all these different songs we did, I programmed the drum machine. So it was just the three of us, and we do Nicky Hoy, and then they had the actual tracks from the master of Happy Together and She'd Rather Be With Me and Eleanor. So it was the actual track from the record minus the vocals. So we sang live to that. And we did a very funny thing called The Fence. So instead of Pink Floyd's The Wall, it was Pink, Flo, and Eddie's The Fence. And we bring out this rattan fence on the stage and throw airplanes and balloons and hippos and all these blow up animals, and they play We Don't Need No Education, but they play it sped up. So it's We Don't Need No Education. You know, it's really hilarious. So that is on this video on YouTube that I have with the 2.5 man show, shot in Sweden, in Stockholm. And the opening act for us was U2. In fact, on the stage is the U2 drum kit right behind us. So we had lunch with Bono. So Mark Volman and Bono and me are sitting having lunch at the, you know, at the whatever. And Bono asked us for our autograph. So I gave my autograph to Bono. It's hilarious.
You're a star.
I'm a star. Bono's got my autograph.
Yeah, that's proof right there. That's validation. There you go.
Yeah.
So this must have been, if U2 is opening for you, late 70s.
It was actually 81.
Ooh, okay.
And they were doing I Will Follow.
Okay.
Yeah. That was their hit at that time.
All right. Let me make sure there's some things I have to bring up here. Let's talk about Ringo. Okay. There's a bit in your book about you being called the demo doctor.
Yes.
And you made demos for people like Ringo and Eric Carmen and Jimmy Webb and people like that. What demos did you make for Ringo?
Well, I was really close friends with Harry Nilsson. We recorded 35 songs in my demo doctor living room. Every week we do a new song, you know? And so I said, Harry, I really would love to meet Ringo. So Harry really loved me. We were buddies. We'd stay up to 4 o'clock in the morning and drive around in his Mercedes, listening to all of his hit records. So anyhow, Harry and Ringo wanted to do a children's album of famous children's stories, you know, and Ringo would be the narrator on this project. So Harry got Ringo to come to my living room and do the narration for these children's stories. But the story goes like this. This is great. 1968, I'm sitting at my harpsichord in my Hollywood apartment, and I have this premonition. A Beatle was in my house, and he sat next to me, and he took his shoes off. This is what I'm thinking in 1968 in my living room, you know, smoking a joint, playing the harpsichord. And I thought of this, And then later in 1992 or 91, Harry brings Ringo Starr to my living room. And what does he do? He sits right next to me and he takes his shoes off.
You knew.
So, look, and before I met Ringo, I actually was hired to play the organ and sing background vocals on a Kinky Friedman album.
Was going to get to that, but you might as well talk about that now. It's a great little novelty record, which I've played on the air, called Men's Room in LA.
Yes, this was recorded at Haji Recording Studios, owned by Alex Casanegris and John Fiore. And it was a truck, a recording truck in the driveway, in the alley, with all the cables going into the room in this building.
Yeah.
And they had a little camera, a video camera, so everybody can communicate with the musicians and the engineer. So, Lee Von Helm was there with Dr.John and all these people, and we were all hanging out because they did some overdubs for Kinky Friedman as well. So Alex comes up to me and says, I need you to play the Hammond organ, and I need you to sing female high vocals, like angelic high vocals.
Okay.
So, and this was on Ringo Starr's cameo on a song called Men's Room LA.
In LA.
And his cameo is he plays the part of Jesus, and he's sitting on the toilet and he can't find any toilet paper. So that's what his cameo was about. So I got to play organ and sing background vocals behind Ringo Starr on this cameo way before I met him.
Right.
So that was like 1976 or something like that.
Yeah, we should include the link to that in the description box.
It's online. You can Google
you can easily on YouTube, and it's really very funny.
It is.
And but getting back to those demos that you talked about, this has nothing to do with Thomas the Tank Engine, right? Because that was around late 80s, early 90s.
Right.
This is something completely separate, these children's stories?
Yes, it was all these great little children. I can't remember anything, but Harry and Ringo wanted to do a children's storybook with Ringo narrating, and me and Harry and Van Dyke Parks doing the music for the background for Ringo's thing. But Harry died, and that project just was on the shelf, never finished it.
So did you ever do any demos of music with Ringo?
Never did. The only thing I played music with is Men's Room LA with Kinky Friedman. Yeah. Okay.
Hey, but, if that's all I ever did with Ringo, I'd be proud.
Well, Ringo did tell us a story about Paul McCartney.
Okay.
And Ringo,
why don't you tell us?
So we finished the recording session, and we're sitting around, and first of all, I said to Ringo, do you mind if I ask you a flavor? He says, a flavor? Because my mom always would used to say that instead of a favor, a flavor. Anyway, so I says, do you mind if I take a picture, if Harry takes our picture? I had a little Kodak throwaway camera, the little yellow box. So Harry took the picture of me and Ringo. And then I said, well, hey, you guys, let me take a picture of you. So I got a picture of Ringo and Harry.
Yeah.
And then we're talking about, what it was like, working with the Beatles and stuff. And Ringo says, I got a great story for you. Mal Evans and Paul McCartney were on an airplane. And Paul said to Mal, this is Ringo talking. Paul said to Mal, hey, I want to do a fictitious name. I want to make up like a story album, with not the Beatles, but another band, and make up a storyline for the whole thing.
Right.
And so they're eating, and there's a salt and pepper shaker on the table where they're eating. So Paul says, can you think of anything that we can use for a name? So Mal picks up the pepper and he goes, how about Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band? And that was Mal Evans who thought of that name. It's a true story.
Okay, well, Paul has told the story kind of, sort of like
Different.
that.
Yeah, because he's Paul. But that's from Ringo. That was what Ringo said to us. So that was,
okay.
I thought, pretty interesting.
Let's finish up the Ringo part. Have you had any other encounters with Ringo through the years?
No, I haven't. He got a little bit upset because I put an advertisement in the Music Connection magazine about my demo doctor business. And I used the photograph of me and Ringo. And so I got a letter from Bruce Grickel, Ringo's attorney, saying that I represent Richard Starkey, known as Ringo Starr, and you're not allowed to use Ringo's picture to advertise your studio. So that was, so I was kind of a little scared to talk to Ringo, especially after Harry died, because I really, really wanted Ringo to help put an album together as a tribute to Harry. But Mark Hudson did that anyways. So, but after our little recording session, we hopped in Harry's car and we drove to Ringo's house. And on the way, there was a bum on the corner of Laurel Canyon and Sunset, bum. And so Ringo rolls down the window. We're at the traffic light and he whips out a $20 bill and he gives it to the bum. I mean, that Ringo is really a really sweetheart guy. So we go to his house and Barbara Bach is there and she serves us some tea. And I asked Ringo if I can go to the bathroom. He said, sure, it's all right around the corner. So I go into the bathroom and as I'm peeing over the toilet, there's a platinum album, It Don't Come Easy. I'm staring at it, Don't Come Easy, while I'm peeing. So that was really hilarious. Then I come back into the living room and Ringo has two acoustic guitars on each side of the couch, a red one and a blue one. And they both have the star inlay in the fretboard, like little stars. So I said to Ringo, do you mind if I play your guitar? Oh, go right ahead. So I pick it up and I start playing a G chord. And then Harry starts singing, listen for your footsteps coming up to drive. So the real song is in the key of C, but I was doing it in G. So Ringo joins in the key of C. So it sounds like fifths with Harry and Ringo singing. And so here I am in Ringo's living room playing Don't Pass Me By with Ringo and Harry. I mean, oh my God, to me, that's like colossal.
Things you dream of that could possibly happen. Yeah. Tell me about, now correct me if I'm wrong, with George Harrison, you only met him at Harry's funeral, right?
Correct.
Okay.
I went to the funeral and it was filled with celebrities, all Paul Williams and Jim Keltner and George Harrison and Jeff Lynne and tons of celebrities. So we're all hanging around, talk, and then everybody got in their cars and drove around the funeral grounds to the gravesite, right? But George Harrison and I decided not to drive. We decided to walk over this hill. So it was just George and me walking. And I said, hey, George, I'm Andy Cahan. And he goes, oh, Harry spoke very highly of you. And that gave me goosebumps. I went, oh my God, George Harrison is telling me that Harry spoke very highly of me. So that was like, wow. And then we got to the gravesite. And then I think it was Mark Hudson or George started to sing, you're breaking my heart.
Right.
You're tearing it apart. So you.
Okay.
So,
you cut that off. Thank you.
So that's what we sang at the gravesite. We sang that song to Harry. So
I heard about that. So did everybody join in? Did everybody join in on the song?
Yeah, it was all the guys. I don't think Una and the children were doing it, but just the musician, Mark Hudson, maybe Jim Keltner and me and and George were all singing that song, So yeah,
All right.
Great. So that was my meeting with George.
Okay.
That was wonderful.
Now you must talk about Paul.
Oh boy. So this is that same Alice Cooper, Clarence Clemens, Oktoberfest, Universal City Studios, 40 radio stations interviewing everybody. So I played the keyboards in the tent. So we'd have like Eric Burden, and we do one of his songs, and Dean Torrance, and Bobby Hatfield, and Harry Nilsson. So I met Harry there at this thing. So Paul McCartney was one of the guests, but instead of coming to a tent, they had an outdoor amphitheater. So all 40 radio stations sat in the bleachers of this amphitheater, and Paul McCartney was on the stage, and his bodyguard, this is great, the James Bond movie with the Chinese guy with the top hat, he throws the top hat. The guy, Paul McCartney's bodyguard, looked exactly like him. It was hilarious. So anyhow, Flo and Eddie and I were in the bleachers asking questions, about Paul's career. So Paul sees Flo and Eddie, and he knew them because when Happy Together was #1, the Beatles went to Europe, and the Turtles went to Europe and hung out with the Beatles at a nightclub. So they were all friendly, and everybody knew everybody. So Paul McCartney gets up from the stage, walks up the bleachers, and shakes our hands, because it was like an honor, that he picked us out of the entire 40 radio stations. He picked Flo and Eddie, and he came up and shook our hands and went back. And so that's how I met Paul, and it was great. That was mid-'80s or late 80s, somewhere around there.
Now, isn't it true that weren't you at a party for Back to the Egg?
No, I wasn't there. I don't know where you got that from.
Well, from my wife, Joanne.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I guess Flo and Eddie were there.
Maybe so. Probably, yeah. I wasn't there for that.
Okay.
But I was invited when I was playing the scene with Dr.John.
Yeah.
John Lennon got his green card, and he was going to have a party. And I was invited to John Lennon's house for this party. But at the gig, I picked up a girl, and she looked exactly like Janis Joplin. So I went back to the hotel with her and had fun. But I was an idiot because I got called by Maury Baker, the drummer with the real Janis Joplin, that John Lennon was having a party at his Dakota house. I missed it. That was my one opportunity to meet John. But through Harry Nilsson, I was able to learn tons about John and about how Beatlefest started.
Right.
Did you ever hear the story about that?
I've heard it many times.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
From Mark Lapidus.
Of course.
Yes. And I guess we should bring up the one time when Harry was at Beatlefest. And you were there. You were there for that, right?
I filmed the whole thing. It's all on video.
Okay.
And the video starts out with in my living room, and Harry's just fooling around, and he talks about all of his ailments. He had a lot of problems with his body and health. But we drove to the Beatlefest, and then I filmed him, signing autographs. And he was raising money for the
National Coalition for Gun Control.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so he got on the stage, and he had a glass of water, a cup of water, and a cigarette, right? So he's talking to the audience with the cup of water and the cigarette, taking a hit off the cigarette, taking a drink off the water. And he's talking and talking and talking. And then he flicks the ashes of the cigarette into the cup of water.
Mhm.
Right? This is all on video.
Right.
And then he keeps on talking, and then he takes a sip of the water and the ashes, and the
Yeah.
audience is cracking up laughing, and so it's stuff like that that was really great. Then they tried to play can't live if living is without, and
Yeah.
they started it in the original key. They had a Beatle band up there, and they started to do it in the original key.
Right.
But since Harry and John Lennon did Pussycats, John showed Harry the primal scream, which means you go, at full tilt, like on the John Lennon song, "Well, well, well, oh, well," when he wow,
yeah.
So
Mother.
Harry completely lost the top end of his voice. He couldn't sing high anymore after Pussycats. He can only sing tenor and Barry. So all the songs that we recorded in my living room were all low vocals. But anyhow, so at this Beatle Fest, the band did Without You in the original key, which is way high.
Yeah.
So Harry stopped him in the middle. He did the first opening verse, and then when he had to go high, he just stopped the band. He says, "Could you bring it down a couple of keys for me?" And so they redid it in the lower key, and he sang it.
I'm sure he sounded fine in the lower key.
Yeah, and that was one of the times of one rare time that Harry Nilsson performed live. He never performed live. He did perform live in Las Vegas with Ringo. He got Ringo to have him come up and do Without You in Las Vegas with the All-Star Band. And of course, that was, in the early 90s, 91, 92.
It had to be 92.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Because he toured in 89, then 92.
Right.
So,
right.
And Harry died in 94, right?
I think so, or 93. I can't remember exactly. Was it 94?
I think 94.
Yeah.
So let me just ask you, because you just alluded to this recording that you made, which we're giving you the link in the description box. There is a tape that you made of Harry Nilsson in your living room. So all these demos, they're among the last things he ever did.
Yes.
And there is a song in there that you said Harry wrote for Ringo called Easy to Live, which evidently, Ringo hasn't recorded. So did Harry ever talk about the song with you other than record the song? And
that was the first song that we did after I met him at this Flo and Eddie radio station thing. He invited me over to his house, and I told Harry, "Hey, listen, why don't you get back into music? I'm a demo doctor. We can do any song you want to do and have fun." So the very first song he chose was Easy to Live for Ringo. And the drum part was down, 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 down. It was what didn't sound like a Ringo drum part, but the vocals sound like a Ringo song. It's so easy to live. It's so easy to give. It's so easy. It sounded like a Ringo song. And Harry was heartbroken because Ringo didn't like it. That was the very first song we recorded. But then after that, we just did a bunch of commercials that never made it. We did a song called She's Tall when Daryl Hannah played the 50-foot woman. The Attack of the 50-foot woman.
Yeah, okay.
They asked Harry to do the music for that, and we recorded that, but that never happened. And so what was I just saying? Because my brain just skipped.
He talked about the song She's Tall, but we were talking about the song for Ringo first.
Oh, right, the Ringo song. So yeah, Harry was heartbroken that Ringo didn't do the song. But we did great cover songs. We did Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow?
I heard. Very good.
And Harry was literally going to invite Carole King over to do harmonies with him, but he passed away, and that didn't come out. And we did Mother-in-Law, Mother-in-Law, and great stuff. And then we did People That We did one of his songs that the Turtles cut and somebody else cut, and he wrote like 4 new verses to it.
Okay.
This could be the night I'm waiting for. That was the song, and we redid it in my living room, and he added like 3 or 4 verses, which made it a very rare recording. And then, of course, he wrote a song with John Lennon called "You Are Here." And John Lennon has another version that he wrote. So Harry told me, listen, I wrote the song with John, let's record it. And all the lyrics are, you are here, you are you here, you. And it was just those words with the lyrics. And so that was kind of fun.
I've been curious about that recording.
Yes.
Because if you look online,
you'll find
I'm not sure. Well, it's a little confusing. It says that Harry Nilsson, who was married 3 times, his second wife, Diane.
Yes.
This is in 1968. Said that she wanted to challenge the 2 of them to write 2 different songs with the same title.
Oh, really?
So John had "You Are Here," which ended up on Mind Games, but I never heard that John wrote "You Are Here," the Harry Nilsson song, because there's an early demo of it.
Yes.
From, I guess, that time period. And then there's the recording that you made. But where is there proof? I guess because Harry told you that he wrote it with John?
Yes, I believed him. He says, John and I wrote this song called "You Are Here." But then I Googled it and I found John Lennon's version, which is a totally different song.
Yeah.
So that's what we recorded, Harry's version of "You Are Here."
Yeah, well, there was the art exhibit that John and Yoko were doing at the time in 71 or something. So the song was kind of named after, the exhibit. But they're 2 completely different songs. But I just, I never heard John ever talk about the song "You Are Here" with Harry Nilsson. I never heard that at all. So I just would want some kind of proof other than you're telling me, that Harry said that. So
yeah, he just said, I wrote this song with John called "You Are Here," and it's real simple. Here is how it goes: 3 chords, and that was it. Yeah, so I kind of believed him. I don't think he was making it up. But then when I hear the other version that John did, it's a whole different song.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. There's no dispute about them being 2 completely different songs.
Really?
But you listen to that tape, and I tell you, Harry's voice sounds fine to me. I still love his voice as it was towards the end. Yeah. Are you happy with, we're going to close with this because there was an album that came out a few years ago, Lost and Found, which are, I don't know if they're all or they're among the last songs that Harry recorded, one of which happened to be a Yoko song, "Listen, the Snow is Falling."
Oh, right.
And then there's the Jimmy Webb song, which is also on your tape.
Yeah, what's very interesting is that Harry knew that Jimmy Webb was recording at Record One Studios with Linda Ronstadt and another guy producing him.
Mm-hmm.
So Harry and I went to the studio, took Jimmy Webb over to my house, and had him play the keyboard part for "What Does a Woman See in a Man?" And it was my plastic synthesizer. And Jimmy Webb said, no, I can't do this. I'm not going to play this piece of plastic. He was a grand piano guy.
Right.
And he wanted a grand piano. So Harry and I convinced him finally. And so he laid down the piano track, and then we took him back to to Linda Ronstadt. And then Harry and I came back, and Harry put down the vocals, and I put down the cello and all these really cool. And it was my favorite Harry Nilsson recording. I mean, it was incredible. But "Lost and Found" and "Strange Love," the 2 Mark Hudson songs, was recorded in my living room with Harry on a Shure SM58 mic, on a Fostex 4-track cassette, of all things. And then another song called Lullaby, which I'm playing all the music on.
Mm-hmm.
And the very last song that Harry recorded was with Mark Hudson in my living room, called Rescue Boy. And it's all about me getting Harry back into music again, because
Mm-hmm.
he stopped playing music. He was doing a script company that provided scripts for television and movies. And he stopped. He sold his piano, he sold his guitar, and he didn't have any music going on. So I brought him back into music, and we became like childhood, like high school buddies, driving around, smoking a joint, singing, 4 o'clock in the morning. He'd
Uh-huh.
take me over to Timothy Leary's house. He'd take me to Joe Walsh's house, or Bill Martin, the guy who wrote Harry and the Hendersons movie.
Uh-huh.
Now, Harry in the Hendersons, that was after Harry Nilsson. Pretty cool
Didn't know
stuff.
that. Yeah.
So, yeah, Harry and I were very, very close, very close.
All right. Before we go, what was the
Yes.
state of Harry's mind towards the end? Was he happy with all that he accomplished?
Well,
Or was he very frustrated because, most of his success was late 60s, early 70s? And
he
yeah.
was frustrated because he couldn't sing high anymore.
Hmm.
That was Harry,
Yeah.
singing all the high stuff. And after he lost his voice, it was very difficult, That's why he chose Mother-in-Law and Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow. I mean, there are a couple of, woo, woo, that he can do, but full throat high stuff, he couldn't sing anymore. And that really bummed him out. And then his trusted accountant, name of Cindy Sims, stole $9 million from Harry. And he lost his property in Hawaii, and he lost his property somewhere else. And the IRS was going to take his home in Agora Hills. And luckily, he found out about it, and they took Cindy Sims to court, and she went to jail. But he lost $9 million because of her. So he was he had neuropathy, he had phlebitis, he had diabetes, he had all kinds of problems, and he was obese, he was overweight, and he had one heart attack. And I would go visit him in the hospital, and he would say, "Bring me a chocolate bar. I want some chocolate." Yeah. So I would sneak, a Mounds chocolate bar, just so we can have some chocolate, because they didn't want he couldn't do that in the hospital. Yeah. So, and then he finally had his second heart attack, which killed him. But it was heartbreaking. It was horrible.
Yeah, it must have been 10 times worse for you being so close to him.
Yeah. And it was more frustrating when Mark Hudson, put out the album and I didn't get any credit. But I don't want to get negative. I want to stay positive.
Okay. Well, anyway, this is the book right here, The Most Famous Musician You've Never Heard Of. Do you make sure you pick this up? There's going to be all kinds of links in the description box for Andy's music, and discover the life of Andy right here, Andy Cahan. You've been a tremendous guest here. Thanks so much for joining us on the channel, and let's stay in touch.
Absolutely, absolutely. And say hi to your beautiful wife for me.
Yes, I will do that. Okay.
All right. Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you, Andy. And thanks to all of you for watching. And we'll see you next time.
All right. Have a great day, everybody.
Okay.